Hello, and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and today we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 23, Underworld Overthrown. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in with the episode summary. Kaz is trying to save Hearing from Millaine's mind control once again, but fails and gets himself brainwashed instead. Meanwhile, Kaor is planning a trap to blow up the Marillions at the Martian Merc, which is an oil field that they are trying to flood. Tom, Peyton, and Sarah are watching a Danian player lose a match against a Marillion when Tom calls Kaz and gets a warning from the Marillions through Kaz because Kaz got brainwashed. Tom goes to grab Kaz, and Peyton and Sarah search for the Mind Bander, a battle gear that frees a creature from mind control. Meanwhile, Ani, the leader of the Marillions, gives Velfor and Von Blut a green light. At the Martian Merc, Kaor shoots his cannon and blows up the Merc. All the Underworlders are safe, Tom is able to save Kaz, but the Marillions are also able to survive under the oil, and they reveal that this was actually a trap for Kaor to lead him away from Underworld City so that Velfor could take control of Underworld City with Von Blut and his forces while under Velfor's psychic command. And that's the episode we're dealing with. So, on to analysis. This is a big episode. So much happens. And it's so well constructed, and I just love it. So, let's start with the setup. We have three plots going on, three plots at the same time: A plot, B plot, C plot. And the A plot is, I would say, the humans, right? Kaz is trying to save Hearing once again. And then Tom and friends watch a match, and then they try to save Kaz. And this is where the height of the emotion in the episode comes from. And then the B plot, I would say, is Kaor and the Underworlders. Kaor plans a trap for the Marillions and succeeds with his plan, but so does the Marillion plan. And this is where the height of action is in this episode. It raises the stakes. It is extremely pivotal in not only the overarching story, but like in this story specifically, right? And not just for the story, but for these characters. And then we have the C plot, which I would say is Ani, Velfor, and Von Blut. And this is shock value. This provides context for the overarching plot and pulls us into the twists and turns that we don't expect, right? The twist that the Marillions actually survive, and it was planned by Ani, right? That comes from this C plot. So let's dive in with each of these plots, and let's start with the A plot, the humans. So this through line is very dependent on friendship and on interpersonal relationships, right? A bond that two people share. And Kaz is a really good friend to Hearing because he tries again and again to save Hearing from Marillion control. And this is what, his third attempt? I'm not counting, but we've seen at least two. And, both times he's using the flux bobble, and it's like, let's get more creative. Obviously, it didn't work the first time, but Kaz is committed to his relationship with Hearing, and he feels guilty because he got Hearing into this situation in the first place. But you can tell that like he does care for Hearing as a friend and as a creature, and that's like shown in this episode, not just through his next attempt of saving Hearing, but through other ways. Like when Kaz gets brainwashed, who's by his side? It's Hearing. And when Kaz is throwing rocks, who's by his side? It's Hearing. When Tom tries to grab Kaz, who's by his side? It's Hearing. Right? Kaz and Hearing, they're buddies, they're together, and even when they're under Marillion control, they're still like seen as this duo. Especially when Kaz thinks that Hearing got blown up. Like, oh, the waterworks. Like, he is so effective and like personally devastated by the potentiality that Hearing has passed, right? There is a bond, there's a deep connection between these two. They've gone on adventures, they've seen highs, they've seen lows. And that's like what this episode is built upon, the relationships between each other. And one of those is Kaz and Hearing, but the other one is Tom and Kaz. Tom finds out that Kaz has been brainwashed, and ugh, the look on his face, the sound in his voice, it's heartbreaking. It's the determination that Tom has to save Kaz is unlike any determination we've seen within Tom before. It's never even a question. It's an automatic response of we must save Kaz. And it goes to show how strong the relationship between Tom and Kaz is. They're best friends. They are best friends in the human world, they're best friends in chaotic. They have commonalities, they have differences, but what they have is a bond. And it really demonstrates what Kaz means to Tom, not only as a friend, but as a companion. There is this emotional response from Tom. And I do have to give props to the voice actor here. Like, he really does a great job. And he demonstrates that fear, that panic that sets in when he understands that Kaz has been brainwashed. It's such a moment. And, like, what does this emphasis on friendship speak to the theme of the episode? This episode is just a cog in the overarching story. Like, yes, this episode is great TV, and it does tell a complete story because, it's an episode of TV and it's also contributing to the larger plot, which like that's what you want from a TV show. You want it to have an individual story per episode, but also have an overarching like plot. And by that's what you want from an episode, that's what I want from an episode. That's what I want from a TV show. But in the grand scheme of things, this is really just rising action for the overarching story, and the overarching story is the one with the themes, right? Like the narrative arc in this episode is Kaz gets brainwashed and then gets saved, and then the underworlders like have a plan and that plan gets foiled, or the plan doesn't work in the long run, right? That's this episode's thing. But this emphasis on friendship, right? It makes you ask the question, like, what would you do for someone you love? What would you do for someone you platonically love? And it speaks to the lengths that these characters would go to for each other. And so, like, a theme here could be the bonds between friends pushes people to protect and defend each other, or like something to that extent. That's really encapsulated in this episode, and the theme of this episode specifically is the lengths we would go to for each other, right? And, there are these overarching themes in the series itself, in the Marillion invasion arc, but there's such heart in this episode. Now, it's not just Tom and Kaz here in the human world of this episode. We also have to talk about Peyton and Sarah, who do some heavy liftings in terms of getting the Mind Bander, but also they help to commentate on the Damien Dan match. And this is another thing we need to talk about. The match is so special and unique to me because of the way it's used, right? We rarely get to see matches of characters that like aren't our characters, right? We have a match here and there, like, Buzz Jr.'s match. Well, I guess that was against Tom, but, and then it turns into a match against Kaz. Bad example. But, like, there's a moment when they're watching Clay's match, which is like Vile versus Gnarless, and that's a moment we get to see a match that's like not one of our main characters, but it does have Clay in it, and like, it's just a moment. And so I think the fact that I can only name one, well, two off the top of my head, but only one of them is a real example, like goes to show how rare it is. And, they don't contribute anything to the larger plot so much as like showing the Vile Gnarless situation really just highlighted those characters, have a moment for these characters in the show, so when you get the cards, you like them better, right? You have that moment of connection. But this example of characters who are not our own, we never even get to see Damien Dan, right? We just see the Danian and the Marillion in the drone. But this time we dedicate time to watching this match, right? We're not just like watching a moment from the match and commentating on it. We're like giving this time, we're spending story here in, right, a 22-minute episode that like goes by fast. We have a lot of moments like this episode kind of feels like a movie because there are so many things that happen, and even though it doesn't directly impact the plot, besides like, it showcases the Mind Bander, which does come into play in the plot of like putting on a Kaz to release the brain control, right? But also they got him far enough away from Million that they could have gotten him to port out. So like it does have an impact on the plot, but like minimal. And also, right, if they were just trying to establish the Mind Bander, they could have done that in a moment. They could have just been like, this is the Mind Bander, we saw it in a match, we're gonna go get it. Right? But they spend time here, and that's because it has a purpose. And the purpose of this match is theme, right? It's contributing themes to the overarching story, which up until this point, the Marillions have really been working in the background, building up like, foot in the door style. We get a little bit, we get a little bit more, right? They're taking and taking and taking, but we haven't been able to like witness all of the atrocities that the Merlians have been committing because like the scope of our perspective is limited to these characters, right? We know that Ihun Kalen is in Merlian territory, but we don't get to see him flood Rao Pasak. And we know that Mount Pillar is inhospitable because they poisoned the reservoir, but we don't get to see that. What we get to see is what happens in the underworld. And that's important, but we haven't been able to hold witness to all of the atrocities that they have been committing. And it's like built and built and built, and we're at this tipping point where it's not just individual tribal conflicts, this is all out war, and with casualties and loss and strategy and battle. Like this episode is the point of no return, and this chaotic match is symbolic of that, right? We are watching the match for the first time, and our characters stop and reflect. This is the first time they take a moment, look to their left, look to the right, and they realize the point that it's gotten to, right? They're living through it, so it's been this continuous build. It's been this continuous build where, like, things have gotten to a place, but for the first moment, they realize that, like, it's not good. They notice and point out that the drone battles have been uglier than ever, right? Meaning more ruthless, more aggressive, more difficult, especially with Marillion opponents. And they also point out that Param is looking uglier too, right? The lava pond has been flooded, Rao Pasak has been flooded, Mount Pillar has been poisoned, the riverlands have been contaminated, and the Daegru River, they built a dam there, and right, the impacts that Marillions are having in Param, they're making it worse. They're making it inhospitable for other creatures to live. And now they're trying to flood Martian Murk, right? The landscape of Param is not what it once was. And these changes have been both slow and very rapid, right? These changes happened so fast that our characters couldn't pinpoint what was happening until now, until they take a breath and realize, like, oh dang, this is bad. And even though this is the moment that they realize, like, oh dang, this is bad, it's already past the point of no return. It's too late. They've noticed too late. And sure, there is a hypothetical alliance between the Overworlders and the Damians, but we haven't seen any effects of that yet. And in this episode, Kaor is taking a stand against the Marillions as an individual tribal conflict, and maybe if he won, that would have been good in the grand scheme of things, but he didn't, and now Underworld City has fallen, right? It's too late. And so this chaotic match that they're watching, Kavik versus Rathtab, runs parallel to the story at hand. Danian Dan instills hope in our players that he may be able to defeat a Marillion. And he has cool moves, he has battle gear, and they think that he can do it. And for a second, there's hope. But then the rug gets pulled out from under him, and Danian Dan loses. And it parallels the story in this episode. We think that for a second, Kaor is going to defeat the Marillions. He blew them all up in the oil field, but then the rug gets pulled out from him, and he loses. The Marillions are still alive, but not only that, this was a diversion, and Underworld City has fallen under Von Blut's control, which Von Blut's control is actually Felfor's control, which is actually Ani's control, which means the Marillions have taken control, right? The story within a story is an allegory for the story itself, and the match emphasizes the dire situation and the hopelessness that it causes, right? The hopelessness that not only our characters feel, but the creatures in Param. And so they spend time, they dedicate time to this match because they're trying to prove a point. They're trying to prove that not only are the Marillions this force to be reckoned with in terms of making Param unrecognizable and it's difficult for the creatures to live, a brute force, a difficult opponent. Not only are they a difficult opponent, but they're a tactical one. They've done this strategically in a way that now that the characters realize this is bigger than what they thought it was, it's too late. And the dominoes are falling, and there's just something there. But let's move on to the B plot with the Martian Merc, right? So the plot really ups the stakes of the battle, right? The Merlians have new creatures on their side. We get to see the buff coral warriors and the tiny little floating eyes, which one is the muscle, right? The infantry, if you will, and the other is a tool that is used to create a surveillance state, these added creatures have upped the ante. But we also get Takinam in her Shadow Knight armor. We get giant battle gear that shoots fireballs. And we get this devastation and torture and despair that we haven't seen before. There's this moment with Ilizar, the moment where he gets trapped in this gas sphere that's specifically designed to show cruelty. It's not just another battle. It's not a power pulse or a rock wave, which are like brute force attacks, the equivalent of a punch. This is a gas sphere that is designed to hurt somebody, to make them miserable. And it incapacitates Ilizar in a painful way that's unnecessarily painful. It's cruel and unusual, but it shows the horrors of war in a way that we haven't seen yet in this series. It raises the stakes to what we know can happen to a creature, and the attacks are mean and nasty and ugly, and they show us that. And Kaor breaking out into a passionate rage about how Marillions have shown us no mercy, and so they will get none, it ups the ante. What we're seeing happen to the creatures and how it's making them react is unlike anything we've seen before. And even Raren has a full narrative arc in this episode. He goes from soldier who makes a split-second decision to save lives. He's a war hero. He does so successfully. And in an instant, we see him get brainwashed. And then he comes back as a medium for Ani to speak through the plan in a matter of seconds. And oh, how the mighty have fallen. But this instantaneous switch from the highest of highs, he saved his friends, he saved people of his tribe, he prevented disaster and saved lives, to immediately being on the other side even further demonstrates the rise in stakes and danger that the Marillions hold. And with that, into the C plot, Felfour and Von Blute, what does Raren tell us? He tells us about Ani, the big bad. He heralds Von Blute as the leader of Underworld City under Felfour's psychic command, which is jaw-dropping. He shows the twist. He tells us the reveal that this was a diversion to conquer the underworld, and Kaor fell for it. Kaor, a character that we have seen to be right a lot of the time. He sussed out Felfour as evil. He made a plan with Kaor's commandos, right? He's not a role model, but he has a good instinct. And the Marillions pulled a fast one here. But not only that, they weave this narrative through the episode so that it's not a twist. It is a twist, but it's not out of nowhere, right? It's not unfounded. They show us Felfour early in the episode and Von Blute by his side ready. They get the green light, and so they plant that seed that they come back to with Raren. And we haven't seen Felfour since he opened the doors. And even then, he was using Von Blute as a distraction for Kaor and Takinam, and so it makes sense in the canon that Felfour has been hanging around the underworld with Von Blute, and nobody knew, because Von Blute has been under his control and has been able to keep him a secret. I know, you forget that there's this whole other army, there's this whole other factor at play, and so using them is a good twist. And it's set up because Felfour has come in contact with Von Blute before, and they plant that seed in this episode. And Von Blute is right there. And here's the thing, there's even a card for this, right? Underworld City under Von Blute's ascent. It's a good tie-in of what's happening in the show and what's happening in the cards. But this plot also introduces Ani, who is our big bad of the season, right? This multi-level marketing scheme of Marillion brainwashing, Ani's at the top. And this once again ups the ante, but it also shows us that the end is in sight. They've revealed the top of this pyramid, and they've shown us the big bad. And so now that we know who the big bad is, we know once they defeat Ani, that's the end of the invasion. That's the goal. Ani has played his hand, and now they understand what they're working with. They understand who they're up against, and that's Ani. But they don't know fully, they just know his name. And it'll be interesting to see how that comes back. Now, onto lore. We get a lot of lore in this episode, but specifically about the Merlians, right? We learn about Ani and that he's the top of the pyramid, and that he can psychically communicate with Belphor through, this great distance. And he's the one who gives the green light, implying that he's in charge, but it really comes from Raren's mouth. He says, I am Ani, the supreme ruler of the Merlians. And you're like, oh, there it is. That's the guy in charge. And he's the one creating the strategy, being tactical. He's the big bad. And we also get to see these new creatures, the coral soldiers and the floating eye guys. But the big reveal, besides Ani, of course, is that the Marillions survived in the oil. And this builds upon what Maxor says in the Riverlands a couple episodes ago about how it's so contaminated that only Marillions could survive in it. And here we build upon that, defining just how contaminated of a substance Marillions can thrive in. And in that episode, we see Marillions in the contaminated Riverlands, but here they build upon that, and you ask, like, how contaminated of a substance can they live in? And they answer it. The answer is oil, right? Raren even goes on to say that they can survive in all kinds of inhospitable fluids, and so that locks in lore about Marillions. They're not just water creatures, they are fluid creatures. They are characters about liquids. And the nastier the better, frankly. Give them oil, they'll have a good time. But we also get to build upon what we learned in the Mr. E episode, and that is not only can Marillions control creatures, they can control humans. And not only can they control humans, but they can communicate through them as well, right? He used Kaz as a puppet. Melaine is talking through Kaz, which is haunting. And, he gives them a warning message. Any humans who interfere will resort to this fate, will be brainwashed just like the other creatures. So, it's a warning of don't intervene, otherwise you'll pay the consequence. And as any good warning goes, maybe we'll see that in the future too. But another thing about this episode is we get a peek into the Mount Pillar location. We see the incubation chamber and the devastation that the Merlians have caused there. It's dark, it's gross, it's flooded, and all the eggs are broken, which is truly horrendous. We also get to learn about other locations like the Martian Murk and the Daegru River, but finally we learn about the Mindbander. Big news. This battle gear breaks mind control, and frankly I can see how that could be useful in an invasion that's about mind control. The last piece of lore we get in this episode is we get to see Olmar's new invention, which is the Annihilator or the Annihilator. They call it both in this episode, but you have to remember this one because this one is going to come back in a big way. And let's move on to fun facts and other notes because on the menu today we have tortilla chips with no dip, so that's fun, something to crunch on. But this episode is a good show don't tell episode. They have narrative moments where they don't tell you about it. They do show it to you. And that example is when Raren gets brainwashed, you see the brainwash attack come from Melaine and hit Raren. And so you see it happen before Raren pulls up and says, hey, I'm Ani. And we also get this moment of, Tom forgets to call Kaz and they zoom in on the scanner, which really emphasizes that he forgot. And, they don't tell us hey, Tom, you forgot to call Kaz. They show us and they zoom in to really emphasize it. And those are just some examples. They do also do some telling in this episode, like with Ani and Felfour, that's more of a tell moment. But they have some really good, storytelling visually. And in a visual medium, that's all you can ask for. Other notes I have written down is that the call in the beginning is really just an excuse for Kaz to give us exposition. And also, I love Narfall. And so those are my notes. My final thoughts on this episode are this episode is way too good. The way I was locked in, the way I was entranced by this episode, I mean truly, genuinely I had to watch this episode twice because the first time I really was just watching to enjoy. Well, the first time I was watching to take notes, but then I became entranced and I forgot to. And so I watched it again so that I could, dissect it a little further because I was just having too much fun. Well, you know, being locked into the story. But this is, it's actually an incredible piece of television. It has strategy, it has emotion, it builds stakes. and it has this overarching story that it connects to. And there's theme, and there's elements for me where just like everything comes together. You have the drome, you have Param, you have humans, you have creatures, you have Merlians, you have battle gear, and you have the battle itself, and you have this devastation in Param, right? They're tying it in, like, in the titular Merlian invasion, this is it. This is the moment of no return, and you can feel that. The emotion behind it, like, it's particularly strong storytelling, and it, like, it affects me. I love these characters, and I love the world they live in, and, I don't want anything bad to happen to them, so seeing, like, Ilzar be tortured, that's uncomfortable. And, they want you to feel that. They want you to be affected by these characters and by this storytelling. And that's what happens. And, it's a reason I love Chaotic, is because they're able to encapture emotion and they make you feel. And isn't that catharsis? And I love catharsis. So I could talk about this episode for a while, but I gotta cut it somewhere. So let me know if you saw anything I missed, if you have any thoughts, if this is one of your favorite episodes. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.